Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of NASCAR Mount Rushmore, where I name my Mount Rushmore for every track on the Cup Series schedule. I also included Rockingham in that, so we have obviously more tracks to go. This weekend is Kansas Speedway, so I thought I'd go through my Kansas Speedway NASCAR Mount Rushmore. Please like, comment, subscribe. Of course, comment what would be your Mount Rushmore for Kansas Speedway. But let's begin to get into my Mount Rushmore of Kansas. Sometimes when I'm doing these Mount Rushmores, all the drivers that I end up putting on the Mount Rushmores are drivers that I have either never seen race live or have seen very little of racing live. But a track like Kansas that's overall on the wide spectrum of things is a new racetrack compared to a lot of other racetracks. Kansas opened up back in 2001, so most of these drivers I've seen, not most of these drivers, all of these drivers I've seen race every race at Kansas. So I know what they've been able to do. I know how strong they are at these racetracks. So I think it gives me a little bit of an edge on making these Mount Rushmores. So let's start getting into it. And the first driver I'm going to name here, I also consider the GOAT of Kansas Speedway, and that would be Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin with 4 victories, 15 top 5s, 17 top 10s, and 679 laps led at the Speedway. Yeah, Denny's had some great races here. Has had some great battles with Kyle Larson over the last couple of years as well. It just seems to be a track where Denny seems to have a lot of success at. It's about the longer green flag runs. It's really about taking care of your equipment and making sure you make it to the end of the race. And he usually has a really great person on top of the box. For years, he had Chris Gabehart. He's had great people on top of his pit box over the years. And I think you kind of need that for a win at Kansas. So Denny Hamlin makes the Kansas Speedway Mount Rushmore. And can he get another victory this weekend, make it 5? And that lets us move on to the second driver on this Mount Rushmore, and I just mentioned him a second ago, and that would be Young Money, Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson with 3 victories, 9 top 5s, 13 top 10s, and 925 laps led. The other 3 members on this list have raced more races than what Larson has raced at this racetrack. Larson doesn't have as much experience at this track compared to a lot of his competitors. He hasn't been around as long as a lot of his competitors, but he already has the second most laps led in the history of Kansas Speedway. He has 3 victories already at the racetrack. I'm projecting that he's going to do more. I feel like eventually, by the time he retires, he'll probably be the GOAT of Kansas Speedway by the time he retires, but we'll have to see on that. So I think it's a well-deserving spot for Kyle Larson. And Kansas Speedway, the way it races, it just really fits the way Kyle Larson races. It's a high dominant racetrack, especially at the end of the race. And Larson, we all know how good Larson is at ripping the fence. Let's move on to our third entry. And this driver actually won the first ever race at Kansas Speedway in the NASCAR Cup Series. I consider him a Mount Rushmore driver, period, of all of NASCAR. And of course, I'm talking about Jeff Gordon. Jeff Gordon with 3 victories, 11 top 5s, 14 top 10s, and 218 laps led. I remember growing up seeing Jeff Gordon at Kansas, and I wouldn't consider him the best at Kansas. I never really considered him to be the guy to beat every single time they went to Kansas, but he was consistently good up near the front. Very similar to Larson, obviously, on 2 separate ends of it. But he's ran around the same amount of races as Larson has at this racetrack. So his stats for how many races he actually raced at Kansas Speedway are pretty fantastic, I would say. And Gordon, he's always going to be a threat anywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if he makes it onto every single NASCAR Mount Rushmore for me, because I consider him just a Mount Rushmore driver in general. One of the 4 best drivers in NASCAR history, in my opinion. And that leads us to our fourth and final driver on the NASCAR Mount Rushmore for Kansas Speedway. And I had to really I was debating between a couple of different drivers, like 3 or 4 different drivers on this final spot on the Mount Rushmore. But I had to go with them. I had to go with Happy Harvick, Kevin Harvick. Kevin Harvick with 3 victories, 12 top 5s, 19 top 10s, and 949 laps led. And him leading all those laps, that has him as the all-time lap leader at Kansas Speedway. No one's led 1,000 laps at Kansas Speedway. Maybe that changes this weekend with a driver like Kyle Larson, potentially. But he was just so great at this racetrack. I do remember Harvick being very good at this racetrack, and I was debating between him, Jimmy Johnson, and a couple other drivers. I remember Jimmy being quite good at this racetrack. The Biff I even had in that conversation. I remember the Biff having some good moments at Kansas as well. But I had to go with Happy Harvick. Just really, really, really talented at this racetrack. Did a great job, and he was really good here and at Chicagoland in those early years when those tracks first got introduced in those early 2000s. He was a menace on those sort of tracks when he was over with Richard Childress Racing. So to go through my Mount Rushmore one more time real quickly, the first driver I have on there, and I also think this driver is the GOAT of Kansas Speedway, and that is Denny Hamlin. I have the driver of the number 24, Jeff Gordon. I have Kyle Larson on here. I think he could be the future GOAT of Kansas Speedway. And then, of course, I have the closer closing out Mount Rushmore, and that is Kevin Harvick. But that is my NASCAR Mount Rushmore for Kansas Speedway. Let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts on my Mount Rushmore? And also let me know, what is your Mount Rushmore for Kansas Speedway? Maybe you have a Jimmy Johnson on there. Maybe you have Greg Biffle on there. Maybe you have Kyle Busch. There's a couple other drivers that could be up for debate for this Mount Rushmore as well. Let me know in the comments. And of course, please like and subscribe. But for now, I'm Trackside Larry saying peace.